This is Andy Gutierrez from StarWars.com, and you are listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you're looking for.
This is James Arnold Taylor, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi. I have a good feeling about this.
Joining us today for a cup of coffee is the president and CEO of Rancho Obi-Wan. You know him, you love him, Mr. Steve Sansweet.
Hi, Dan.
Hey, it's great to have you back on, my friend.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Greetings from Petaluma, California, the land of something or other.
The land of wonder. The land of wonder. I'm glad that it's great to talk to you because, of course, we're going to talk about the 40th anniversary of The Empire Strikes Back, which sounds very, very bizarre to say out loud. But I've been thinking about you a lot, especially with what's going on at Rancho Obi-Wan. I always tell people to visit because it's such a wonderful place. And, of course, you and your team there just couldn't be more friendly or hospitable. But this is a different time that we live in. But fortunately, you still have us covered.
We do. We've been talking for years about doing something online, and the virus times have gotten us to push up our time frame, and we have launched a virtual museum, a Rancho Obi-Wan online, and people can take part in it at various levels. There are monthly subscriptions, and according to what level you sign up for, you get lots of video of the collection of me answering questions. I've resurrected Scouting the Galaxy, which used to be the collectibles column that I answered fans' questions in Insider going back a couple of decades, I think now.
Yeah.
In fact, we even found a box of old letters. So I'm going to see if some of those still resonate. You know, my favorites were the ones that were handwritten by 7-year-olds and printed and saying, "Hey, I just bought a blank, blank, blank for $7. How much is it worth?" I always loved letting them down gently.
Yes.
So, but people can go to ranchoobiwan.org and click on Virtual Museum, and there's a preview. Until the end of May, there's swag that comes with it that we mail you. And I'm hoping people take advantage of this. And, you know, we're sort of in a soft launch for May, but we've got a lot of content up there already.
Boy, it's fantastic. I mean, there is so much great stuff. And whether you're a new Star Wars fan or you've been a Star Wars fan for decades, Rancho Obi-Wan has got so much stuff. And I love that the virtual museum has you talking about things, because one of the best things about going to the ranch is hearing you talk about the collection, these collectibles. I mean, for me, and obviously for you even more so, these pieces, they're more than just pieces of plastic or fabric or whatever. They tell a story, how you acquired them and what they mean to you. And I think it comes through so beautifully in your videos.
Thank you, Dan. It's been a lot of fun to do.
They're fun. So what goes into this? I mean, you're doing a lot of video, you and Ann and the team are taking care of business, but do you have like a schedule every day, how many you need to do, or how did that work?
Well, we sat down and I did about 20 Ask Steve questions for Scouting the Galaxy. Then I've done some long form. I mean, they range from less than a minute to some sections. I think we did one sit down that was 11 minutes long. We've set up a little area in the poster room with a background and a setting, and I just sit there and spout stories. So I'll even be going into my early careers at the Philadelphia Inquirer and the Wall Street Journal, and how I got into toy collecting, and you know, my life at Lucasfilm. So there's a lot to be discovered in the videos, and I'm just talking my head off while I still remember the stories.
Well, to me, this stuff behind the scenes, as well as what was on film or in the mythology itself, they're both equally fascinating. And I've always been so enamored with your journey, your own hero's journey. You know, as a reporter for the Wall Street Journal, of course, being an English and literature teacher, I know the importance of writing because you understand what it means to tell a story.
Right.
Which leads beautifully into The Empire Strikes Back, 40th anniversary. I'd love to hear the story of when you first saw The Empire Strikes Back.
Well, funny enough, it isn't as clear to me as when I first saw Star Wars, but I know it was again on the back lot of 20th Century Fox, and it was as was Star Wars, and it was about a week before the movie opened. Star Wars was about 2 weeks before the movie opened, and it was a media screening, and there were a lot of people there for Star Wars, but there was this sense of excitement for The Empire Strikes Back that you knew people were waiting for 3 years to see how this story came out and what happened, and when that Darth Vader TIE fighter just spun away and wait a second, does that mean there's going to be another movie? So and this was in the early days, of course, before Episode 4 was put on the title. That wasn't for a couple of years. So it was very exciting, and I think I sat there with my mouth open for the entire movie.
No, I know what you mean. I remember I was sitting outside in the backyard, and my mom coming out and saying, "Hey, you know that book you're reading?" Because I started reading the novel, which again is heresy for me to think about reading a novel before I see a movie now. But I think I was 8 years old, and she said, "Do you want to go see that movie?" My goodness, yes, because I'm not sure if I've ever told you this, but when I first saw New Hope, it took 5, 6, 7 times to see it, and I didn't see it till the summer of 1978 at a drive-in in New Orleans, Louisiana. And of course,
wow.
It completely blew me away. So this one, I remember seeing it. I remember being grossed out by the tauntaun being sliced open. I remember the power of Yoda in the AT-AT. I mean, there's so many iconic images, and people have been asking me for weeks now, "Hey, what's your favorite part of The Empire Strikes Back?" And that's a tough one. But what do you say when people say that? I'm sure you've got plenty to choose from.
Well, I think my favorite part is the introduction of Yoda, and Yoda explaining the Force in much more detailed terms than we understood it in Star Wars. And I just found it fascinating that this creature, which you learn about afterwards. I didn't read any of the press notes beforehand. I mean, I knew it was a puppet, but how it was done, it was a being. It was Yoda was alive, and he had this quirky sense of humor. And when he took the light from Luke, and he was playing with it, and the food, but then he comes out and says all of these wonderful quotes. The dialogue was just, I think The Empire Strikes Back has the best dialogue of any of the Star Wars movies. And I think I did the paperback book, the quotable Star Wars, I would just as soon kiss a Wookiee. And I think the most quotes came from The Empire Strikes Back. And there were just so many of them. I see StarWars.com did a list of 40 quotes, and almost all of them, I mean, there's some which you need the context, but most of them come back to you as just standalone kinds of things. And I mean, and my favorite quote from all of the movies, "Do or do not, there is no try." And I remember leaving the theater, and I mean, I had lots of emotions. First of all, I didn't know whether Darth Vader was lying or not. And here I find out years later that George actually consulted child psychologists to make sure that wouldn't be too much for kids to bear.
Right.
Now, the bad guy is the father of the good guy? Oh, my God. And I thought he was lying at first, but my friends convinced me that he was telling the truth because of Luke's reaction to him. So I guess I had to listen to that.
That was a big thing. I remember, too, seeing it, and I remember when I first heard that, I remember thinking instantly, that's not true. He's a liar.
Right.
And I just kind of went about my Star Wars day. And then I went back and saw the movie countless times. When he said that, I remember thinking it was impactful, but it wasn't until I read The Empire Strikes Back storybook and my friend pointed out, look, it's all in caps. I am your father. It's got to be true. It says it in the book. And that was almost
another doubter too.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I remember a lot of kids, that was sort of our debate. And of course we did not have social media. So you weren't really sure, because Darth Vader is quite an unreliable narrator, but as it turns out, no, he's actually really telling the truth. And it's pretty glorious and in a wonderful kind of kinesthetic way. Well, not kinesthetic, but just sort of a circle of life sort of thing. When I showed this to my son, who's 6 now, when I showed him that scene, and I went out of my way to make sure that he did not know that Darth Vader was Luke's father. And of course, we protect Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny with equal passion, because those are 3 important things you don't want ruined. And so when he watched it, he looked at me and he said, Daddy, that's not true. He's lying. And I was so excited that he had the same reaction I did.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I can remember just from the very beginning of the movie and, watching the stop motion Tauntaun going across the ice. Mm-hmm. And then when the AT-ATs come on, I was just enthralled. Just these, what a way to open the movie on this giant battle, which you would normally find at the end of a movie. And it's the opening, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, what could come next? And there were just treasures upon treasures rolling out there. And the Rebels escape, and Luke going to Dagobah, and the encounter with Yoda, and then you have all the richness of Bespin and Lando, and is he a good guy or a bad guy? And you're really not sure. And it all was enthralling.
It's beautiful. And you mentioned do or do not, there is no try. And also the piece at StarWars.com that I just did a piece last week, because I have a weekly Teaching with Star Wars column, and we explored do or do not, there is no try. And Steve, I'm sure you've probably run into this too over the years, but as an educator in my mythology class, one of the things I go over, especially the last month of the semester, is Star Wars. And when we get to do or do not, there's no try, I find it's often misinterpreted, which I find fascinating, because, students will say, well, Mr. Zare, is he saying don't try? Aren't you supposed to tell kids to try? Which is great, because then we can talk about, well, look at Luke's body language. Listen to the inflection of his voice and the tone. Do you really think he sounds like someone who's going to give his best effort? And Yoda, 900 years old, has no patience for a student who's not going to give their all and give their best. And that's why Luke fails.
Yeah. And what do your students say to that? Do they understand?
They do. They nod and they smile, and then it opens up this great exploration about, what's scary about failing, which of course The Last Jedi explores in beautiful detail with Yoda's wonderful guest appearance. But we talk about that and why it's scary to take risks, why it's scary to fail, why there's a hardship that sometimes kids have, or that adults have, really, to try something they don't think they'll be good at right away.
Right.
But that's the beauty of growth and learning.
Right. It was also amazing in the structure of the movie that it ends on such a cliffhanger, and knowing that you have to wait for 3 more years. You're absorbing the end of the movie, and you're saying, well, wait a second, what about Han? Do I have to wait 3 years to find out? Yes, patience. Jedi has patience.
That, I think, is so important and I think pivotal to the success of this movie, and really what a bold risk it was. And even if you look now, people talk about Infinity Wars having that punch in the gut ending where the bad guy wins, and that's true. It was very powerful. But you waited 11 months, which is a reasonable amount of time, but not really. For The Empire Strikes Back, 3 years without social media. Our social media was maybe Starlog and things of that nature, and having to wait so long. And my little brother, every time we go back to see Empire, because of course they would re-release or stay in theaters for such a long time, he would say, "Are they finally going to rescue Han Solo?" No, this is the same movie.
It was worth the wait, though.
Yes,
but
I agree.
I think clearly the majority of fans, if they were to vote on their favorite movie, at least the original trilogy fans would vote for The Empire Strikes Back as their favorite because it had so much going for it. I mean, at the box office, it was the least successful. I mean, it still did well, but of the three movies, it was the least successful. Star Wars was the most because it kept coming back, and Empire was the least, and Jedi was the second. So, you can't trust totally the public taste, but in retrospect and years later, it's the movie that really stays with you.
I think you're right too. I think it's definitely got the richest dialogue, and I also love, and it's been fun over the past few weeks. I've been revisiting J.W. Rensler's The Making of the Empire Strikes Back, which is just a gorgeous piece of writing and so insightful. But I think it's very clear that Kirshner and Kasdan and Lucas really wanted this to be a character-driven piece. And I think it's fair to say maybe more than any of the other films, they all, of course, have their merit and strengths, or we wouldn't still be talking about it 40-plus years later. But Empire really puts the focus on character, and I think it's pretty clear, because besides the wonderful examples you gave, that we don't really see the villain for about 20 minutes.
Right. And look at what it did in the introduction of this bounty hunter who had, barely a line to say in this movie. And here we are all these years later, and he is such a popular character, Boba Fett, of course. And we even see traces of Boba Fett in the Clone Wars and perhaps in The Mandalorian Season 2, but in the whole Mandalorian mythos, based on a costume that Joe Johnston and Ralph McQuarrie came up with, a concept that was going to be a super commando, and that George wanted an entire army of these super commandos to replace the stormtroopers. And because of budget constrictions, he had to come up with a different use for this. And so he took this all-white stormtrooper succession figure and made him into a bounty hunter that he gave a line to, and no disintegrations, of course, was just the perfect line. Mm-hmm. And it was such a cool suit that you sort of gave it character. You as an audience member, sort of, whoa, who is this guy? He was the one that George picked to, in the script to go after Han. It could have been Dengar. Yeah. Could have been IG-88. But it was Boba Fett, and it gave us that great character.
And the look, you mentioned Joe Johnston and McQuarrie. I don't think people can possibly understand how it cannot be understated how influential Ralph McQuarrie is to the look, of course, of the original trilogy, but in Empire, there's so many gorgeous images of him creating and painting that gave Lucas and Kasdan and Kirshner and everyone this vision for how Star Wars would look. I mean, I think it might be fair to say he's as integral to the original trilogy as John Williams is.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Ralph did an incredible job, and of course, and John Williams, the music to Empire, Yoda's theme, and the
Imperial March.
The Imperial March was. Yeah, it's hard to remember that was the first time the Imperial March was introduced.
I know.
So it just got better. It just and the critics loved it too. Critics were a little more mixed on the original Star Wars, although most critics loved it. Time magazine called it the movie of the year halfway through the year. And there were some notable critics who thought it was infantile and just didn't get it. But for the most part, Empire was given rave reviews.
So by this point in your life, your collecting had already had truly grown and become a very powerful hobby.
Well, Empire is actually the movie that sort of turned me into a Star Wars collector from a space toy collector.
No kidding.
My collection started with Japanese robots and rockets and real world space toys and fantasy space toys, and I, as part of that, Star Wars then came out, and as part of that, I was buying Star Wars toys because I love Star Wars, but the space theme, and I was buying Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon. All the space toys came out as a result of Star Wars, a lot of the bootlegs. But Empire Strikes Back just solidified my love for Star Wars. And as soon as I saw it, I went into the toy stores, and especially in the old toy stores, the mom and pop toy stores that used to exist, they still had stuff on the shelves from Star Wars. And so I bought things that I had passed up the first time or I couldn't find the first time. And I just went on a wild search for this stuff. And this is before pop toy collecting was really a thing. And in fact, years later, I still had to convince. I used to do a toy show twice a year in Southern California that I was a seller at. And friends of mine who were among the early Star Wars dealers, tried to get in to do the show. And I had to convince the person who ran the show that there was actually a market for Star Wars stuff, because she thought it was too new and everything was still on the shelves. But, they had stuff from all over the world and going back to the original Star Wars. And this was in the 80s already, mid-80s. She just didn't think that she didn't want to be embarrassed by having a Star Wars dealer at the show. So, but Empire really, as I said, got me to really focus on Star Wars. And while I was still buying some of the other toys up to about 1990, my focus was really on Star Wars. And in the mid 80s and in the dark period, in the late 80s, mid to late 80s, I found myself buying out other collectors who were getting out of Star Wars. And that's where the collection really became the basis of what it is today. But it was Empire.
This is Vanessa Marshall, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
As everyone knows, MEI and Mouse Fan Travel is the official travel partner of Coffee with Kenobi. They are wonderful and have always been so great and kind and supportive to me and my family, both for our travel and for travel for the show. Naturally, recently, travel is very, very different. In fact, it's not going on right now at all with everything going on in the world. And the good news is that with MEI and Mouse Fan Travel, they are going to help you have peace of mind. MEI and Mouse Fan Travel wants you to know that you are valued clients, but you're a part of the MEI family. They are putting their decades of experience to work to guide you through this uncertain time. They are going to be your advocates and are going to keep you informed and prepared to travel with confidence when you are ready, when you are comfortable. And they are suggesting that you postpone but don't cancel. They're still open for business. They will help you dream of your next trip. It doesn't have to be in 2020. It can be 2021 and beyond. This is why I love and trust MEI and Mouse Fan Travel, because they will take care of it and me. And they will you too. They're going to be looking up things and helping me and all of you to have peace of mind so that when you're ready, when things have settled down, MEI and Mouse Fan Travel will be the place for you to go. If you have any questions, be sure to reach out to MEI and Mouse Fan Travel, of course, or go to www.coffeewithkenobi.com/mousefan travel. Do you remember like a key piece, or was it just the 3 3/4 inch Kenner figures that really kind of brought it into another level for you?
Yeah, I love the action figures, and they were the fact that there were so many of them, and they were available when the movie came out, unlike having to wait 9 months for them for Star Wars, and the AT-AT, and my favorite Empire Strikes Back toys, though, came out a year or two later, and that was the Micro Collection.
Oh, yes. I was going to ask you about that.
I love the Micro Collection, the Bespin World and Hoth World and Death Star World, and all the little units that fit together, and the miniature metal figures, the painted metal figures, and of course collectors today have picked up some of the prototypes that were never produced, like the Bacta chamber. And but I love these because you could sort of reproduce the movie on your shelf and scenes from the movie. In fact, that's what the Micro Collection started out as, scenes, dioramas that you would have figures for, and they were going to do they were going to go back and do Star Wars, and then they also had some prototypes for Jedi, and the line laid an egg. And the reason was because of the extreme popularity of the 3 3/4 inch figures. And that's why the 12-inch scale figures didn't succeed either. And there was one new one that came out for Empire Strikes Back, and that was IG-88. And then Boba Fett was repackaged in the Empire box, and some of the other ones were done. There were a couple of prototypes out there. There was a Lando doll supposed to come out, Leia in her Bespin dress, and Luke in his Dagobah outfit. So Kenner Products had come up with all kinds of ideas, and Micro Collection became a small part of the total line, but it was unfortunately doomed to failure. But I love it. In fact, I pulled the boxes off the shelves, and just to remind me of how much joy these small toys gave me. And they all had action features, and then you could buy not only the individual pieces, but you could buy the worlds in an action playset that would come with, let's see, the Hoth World came with 18 die-cast figures. And then there were the vehicles, the die-cast Millennium Falcon, and the X-Wing, and the TIE Fighter, and the line look was beautiful, too. It was in these brilliant red boxes, and had its own logo, the Star Wars Micro Collection logo. Just a thing of beauty.
Works of art, really, in their own right. And I'm glad you mentioned the packages, because those, I mean, you see them on eBay on occasion, but to me, if you don't have the box for these, especially, this is definitely, if I had to do a list of the one that got away from my Star Wars collection, it would be this line, because I thought it was great. And I remember seeing them on shelves thinking, oh, that's cool. I'll just get it next time because I'm going to get these figures. And boy, do I wish I could go back in time.
Yeah, well, don't all of us. Little time machine, couple of bucks in the bank, that would be nice.
I'll pick you up in the DeLorean.
Okay, that's a good idea. Good idea.
Well, in this line, the Kenner line is also kind of where the Han Solo, what color is Han Solo's coat debate kind of went, isn't it?
Yeah, it was brown or blue.
Yeah, exactly.
And then they brought it from the archives to one of the celebrations, and you still couldn't.
It's like that dress a couple years ago online.
Yeah, right. Gold or white or green or whatever. Right. I still don't understand that one.
Well, and this is also when they came out. I mean, we got another R2 and we got another 3PL, but this 3PL had the removable limbs and, of course, that great little I guess it's vinyl backpack that you could attach to Chewbacca, and he could carry C-3PO around. I always thought it was really fun.
Right. The little net structure.
Yes,
that was great. And then there was a very simple craft item that I went crazy for because I had something like it as a kid, and I actually made something like it. It was an Empire Strikes Back drawing box, and the art to color was on a very long sheet of paper, and you colored some of it, and then you rolled it up at one end and unrolled it at the other end, and it was this long scene. And it brought me back to my childhood, because I remember having something like that as a kid and then actually making something like that as a kid. So that was a cool piece, and it had beautiful dark blue box and graphics. I mean, so the simple things too that just sort of struck me as being very cool.
In the literature for it, there was that great collectible magazine that kind of took you through kind of some of the behind the scenes. It showed a lot of the McQuarrie stuff, but I always liked, and it was fun for me whenever I go through your library to see these things. But the Star Wars, the Empire Strikes Back mix and match storybook where you flip through the individual.
Oh yeah, that was great.
Love that.
Yeah, that was very cool. And then they followed up the pop-up book with an Empire Strikes Back pop-up book, and the storybook, and the records, and Empire on tape. It's like the first movie. I think that was Buena Vista, at least for the first movie, a Disney product.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Disney and Star Wars go together for a long time.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a beautiful relationship. So besides the great collectibles, and I remember the first time I ever went to Rancho, Obi-Wan. You have that great display at the end where the entrance to the arcade is, and Empire was playing on your screen, and it was during the Hoth sequence. And I remember just feeling like, this is perfect. This is exactly what I used to just sort of dream when you want to visit Rancho Obi-Wan, what it's going to be set up like. So thanks for making that happen.
My pleasure. Yeah, Hoth. I mean, there's so many great parts of Empire that just are indelible, and so many different settings. I mean, you think of Star Wars and you think, okay, well, basically there's Tatooine and ships, but you go from an ice planet to a forest or swamp planet to a beautiful city in the firmament, and it just is remarkable. The look of the movie is so rich, and a lot of that is again due to George and Ralph McQuarrie, and they followed McQuarrie's art quite a bit for the actual production of the movie.
You can in Kirshner, I guess he was so much more. He was concerned with moving the camera a lot more, which I think maybe helped to extend the filming of this, because I know that it was, of course, went through quite a bit of delays because it was a challenging production, and a lot of interesting things happened behind the scenes. So are there any sort of key things that stick out to you or things that you remember about the making of this film?
Well, as Jonathan's book points out, Jonathan Rinsler's book, Making of the Empire Strikes Back, I mean, they were behind almost from the beginning. From the beginning, when they were in Norway, and they got one of the worst out of season storms that the area had seen for decades, just sort of like the sandstorm during the filming of Star Wars. So the filming went on for a couple of extra weeks. I think George was probably pulling his hair out and wondering what was going on. But I mean, the famous photograph of them filming Mark Hamill from inside a doorway at the hotel. Poor Mark is outside freezing, and but they were trying to get at least some action. So and then they had to go to the glacier, which was about a mile or two away, and film the battle scenes. So they ran into quite a few problems initially.
Well, in the description of Hamill when he was laying down, before he has the vision when he sees Ben Kenobi, and they said even within a minute or less, he was shaking uncontrollably because he was so cold.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And there's also some great moments in that book. There's a wonderful sequence towards the middle where Irving Kershner was wearing a cassette recorder, kids, which is an old device which people use to record people's voices. And he was talking with Harrison, and they were crafting the dialogue before he goes into carbon freeze and how and why he should say, "I know," instead of "I love you." And it's just absolutely gripping reading.
Yeah. Yeah, it was the perfect line. And of course, it led to the reversal of that in Return of the Jedi, which just made it even more perfect and better than any of the lines that they could have written for Empire Strikes Back. And when Harrison Ford came up with that, it was just brilliant.
It was nice for me to read that story too, because I think over the years, Ford and his attitude on Star Wars has been much maligned and certainly scrutinized. But when I'm reading this, and of course he's done a lot of recent stuff, I see a guy that really is invested in his character and telling a good story. So it's great to know things like that. Yeah,
I agree. I think he has been maligned. I mean, he has said some things just like Ewan has said some things over the years, but by and large, you can tell that these are two actors who really love being part of this amazing saga and being part of film history.
Yeah.
And getting so much love from the fans. It's really something to be remembered for.
It truly is. And there's a lot to remember, a lot to love about this. Of course, the vintage stuff. But even now, we've got all this great 40th anniversary of The Empire Strikes Back stuff. And one of my favorite things about talking to you is I think we both have this similar, oh, this is so great. Oh my gosh, where am I going to put this stuff? And I got to spend more money. Why does this stuff have to look so darn great?
How am I going to afford this stuff?
Yeah.
But yeah, finding room here. We've got about 400,000 items at Rancho Obi-Wan. It became so impossible to find storage space on site that we have an off-site warehouse that's about 7,000 square feet in downtown Petaluma, location never to be revealed.
That's right.
Where we have a lot of stuff on shelves, and we have filled up that space. I mean, we had 3,000 square feet, and I thought, oh, this will last me. It was sort of like starting Rancho Obi-Wan and when I moved up to Northern California in 1998 and got the first chicken barn all just set out just beautifully, and lots of all these empty racks, and it was going to last forever. And then episode 1 came out and the flood of merchandise, and those shelves got filled very quickly. So, that's sort of the story of Rancho Obi-Wan. Just keep adding on, sort of like the Winchester Mystery House.
There you go. I like that. That's a good connection. Are there any key pieces that have jumped out for you for the 40th anniversary stuff? Me, of course, and Coffee with Kenobi, and Star Wars coffee mugs have been kind of taking on a life of their own in my house. But those Starbucks, you were there.
Those are very cool.
Yes.
Yeah, I saw them. I think you put them on Facebook or somewhere.
Yes.
And I don't have them.
Oh, well, we'll have to do something about that.
Those are very cool.
Mm-hmm.
I just sort of saw them in the last week or so. I didn't know those existed.
I got those on Shop Disney.
Really?
Yeah, shopdisney.com. Yep. Gorgeous.
Wonder if they still have them.
Well, you should check it out for sure, because they are great. And of course, the Black Series, you talked about kind of 3 3/4 line, sort of taking care of the 12-inch line and all this. And now it seems like the Black Series with the 6-inch stuff has kind of done a similar thing. We've got all these great things. And of course, you've got the retro line, which personally I am a massive fan of. I absolutely love the retro line. I haven't seen any of the Empire Strikes Back stuff in stores around here, but that's certainly something I've got my eye on. How about you?
Yeah, me too. And I sort of order that stuff. I have a standing order for the 6-inch and the 3 3/4 line. I've seen some stuff online that the 3 3/4 line is sort of fading.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it's going away or certainly the cost structure has changed a lot. Imagine these figures cost $1.97 back in the day.
Wow.
And now it's, the 3 3/4 figures are $12, $13. And the 6-inch figures are in the 20s. But they're insanely cool.
Yes. The sculpt, especially the Empire Strikes Back 40th anniversary Harrison one, or I should say Han Solo, but my goodness, it looks exactly like him.
Yeah, they can do something at that scale, and with the sculptors they have these days that they just weren't able to do back in the day, and it wasn't as important. And the whole thing has evolved so much that since the early 90s, when pop culture collecting really started to take hold in this culture, people are demanding better sculpts, more action, and they're making things. They used to laugh when you said, "Well, collectors will like that stuff," and we can't make things for collectors. We have to make it for a mass market. Well, things have changed.
Yes, that's quite ironic. Well, before we let you go, you tell the story so well, of course, but typically when I show people my collection and they see Fett, they say, "Oh, did you have the one that fired the rocket?" No, I didn't, because they never made it. Talk about how that thing kind of took on a life of its own, this mythology of this figure that fires the rocket.
Well, Kenner Products announced Boba Fett was introduced to the public in the Star Wars Holiday Special in a 10-minute animated section. And Kenner Products was going to use Boba Fett as a way to get people to send in for a figure that they could get in 1979. And it was in the initial advertising and marketing, it was a Boba Fett figure with a rocket-firing backpack. And it was a simple mechanism with a very lightweight spring, so this missile, this little red rocket, couldn't go very far. And the slot was sort of an L slot, so the little trigger came down and went over to the left. And they were testing it out, and then there was a problem with the firing of small projectiles. Kids could swallow it. And in fact, the story goes that one of Mattel's Battlestar Galactica toys, one of the Cylon ships or one of the other ships, actually, a missile actually choked a little kid. And so the whole choke tube came into being, that parts had to be bigger than a certain diameter, or kids could, really get injured on them. And so they tried another version of the Boba Fett with a J slot, sort of. The slot came over to like the L, but then went up. So it was sort of a locking mechanism. The problem is the rocket was the same size. So you had really the same problem. And people still remember false memories of getting the rocket firing Fett in the mail. But the only Fets that were sent out had the rocket sonic welded, and there was no spring and no slot for a tab to come down and fire a rocket. But people say, "Oh yeah, I had it. I buried it in the backyard. The dog chewed its head off. I set it on fire." It's amazing what false memories can do. The same thing happens with, well, when I first saw Star Wars, there was a scene that blah blah blah. Boba Fett was, or Jabba the Hutt was a guy in a robe, and people read things and saw things in storybooks, and just it got mixed up in their minds, and so those false memories sort of bug us. But Boba Fett firing rocket Boba Fett was never out there. The prices on some of these things now are sort of crazy. Mm-hmm. I lucked into both versions of the rocket firing Boba Fett, the L slot and the J slot. So there are among the highlights of the collection here as far as the vintage figures go.
Undoubtedly. And for my money, I mean, his appeal as a character sort of fell after The Empire Strikes Back, but purely from an action figure perspective, I still feel like that Kenner Boba Fett is the greatest action figure ever made.
It was very cool. Very cool. And that's why we love Boba Fett. And here Jeremy Bulloch, the actor who portrayed Boba Fett, got the role because his brother-in-law asked him to come in and see if the suit fit him. And his brother-in-law was the assistant producer on the movie. So,
and the rest is history.
You never know.
It's so true.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are. With Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is...
As we begin to wrap up the show, I want to thank each of you for taking time out of your busy schedule to have a cup of coffee with me, and for helping to spread the word about our Star Wars family we've got here at Coffee with Kenobi. Be sure to tune in Monday nights at 8 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on Facebook Live at www.coffeewithkenobi.com/live or www.facebook.com/coffeewithkenobi, and have a cup of coffee, tea, or any beverage of your choosing with me as we continue the conversation. To join us in the CWK Cafe, which is our Facebook group, and share your Star Wars thoughts, comments, reviews, and opinions in a family-free, spoiler-free place that is also drama-free, go to www.coffeewithkenobi.com/community and be a part of the conversation, talk about this week's show, or just talk some Star Wars. It is a lot of fun, and you'll make some new friends as well as catch up with longtime friends as well. I also want to thank all of my new and longtime friends who joined me in the CWK Cantina, and let you know how much I appreciate your help and encouragement, and love being able to give back to you with CWK Pour-Over, the exclusive weekly podcast not heard anywhere else. I want to thank Dennis Keithley, Jason Hall, Angela Sauce, Chris Kavarka, Aaron Harris, Alexander Moylan, Ross Halliban, Jeff Ellis, David Nicely, Jessica Berry, Colby Mead, Frank Mulder, LJ Souter, Dustin Mills, Robert Avila, Mark Suter, Nick Deco, Eric Struthers, Jared Cantor, Brian McKinney, Daz Davies, Thea Selby, Chris Metz, Caroline Maselli, Jim Capron, Blake Weaver, Dan Ream, Kurt McKellen, Christine, Simbad Tetrardarian, Ian Thompson, Alex Fracasio, Hannah, Tyler Pompa, Connie Shee, Susan Gray, Chelsea Sansbury, Josh Boylan, Yancey Evans, Sagacious Crumb, and Greg McLaughlin. If you want an additional way to help out the show, go to www.coffeewithkenobi.com/support and join us in the Coffee with Kenobi Cantina. It's a great way to support and help out the show, and 10% of your monthly contributions go directly to the St. Jude Children's Hospital to support the incredibly important work they are doing to help these brave children and their families. Plus, contributors at the CWK All-Star level can watch a video podcast of CWK Pour-Over hosted by me, Tom Gross, and Corey Clubb. In addition to being part of the community on Facebook, please don't forget to visit our website at www.coffeewithkenobi.com for Star Wars news, announcements, reviews, live video, and so much more. If you have a question for me or just want to share your thoughts on the air, feel free to email me at danz@coffeewithkenobi.com and I'll share them on the show. You can also connect with me on Twitter at Mr. Zehr, MRZEHR. There are also a lot of ways to connect with me and Coffee with Kenobi on social media. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Give us a like on Facebook at facebook.com/coffeewithkenobi and check us out on Pinterest. You can find me twice a month on the podcast Looking at Lucasfilm, part of the Jim Hill Media Podcast Network, and you can find my writing on CWK's website, as well as StarWars.com, where I'm an official blogger there, as well as on IGN, where I contribute articles on Star Wars, as well as other pop culture topics. And if you're considering starting a podcast or a blog, let me know how I can help you get started and help you make your creative vision a reality. Be sure to check out danzmedia.com and we can get the process started. I am also available to come to your school, conference, business, or organization to talk about how to tap into your strengths and help you bring out your very best. I want to inspire you to be inspired. Don't be afraid to take that first step into a larger world. Thanks as always to our CWK sponsors, especially MEI and Mouse Fan Travel, our travel partner and your one-stop shop for all things Walt Disney World, Disneyland, the Disney Cruise Lines, or anywhere you want to go on the planet. Please go to www.coffeewithkenobi.com/mousefantravel to book your magical vacation and help support Coffee with Kenobi in the process. If you like this show, please tweet out that you're listening, share it on Facebook, or invite your friends and family to tune in and share a cup of coffee with us. And if the Force is especially with you, please take a couple of minutes to rate and review the show on iTunes or Google Podcasts. Every review makes a huge difference and helps to spread the word. Go to iTunes and search Coffee with Kenobi and you'll see the show there. My circle of friends has grown so much because of each and every one of you, and it means so much to me that we have such a wonderful Star Wars community. It's so true. Well, Steve, it's been glorious talking with you always, but especially about The Empire Strikes Back. Please let everybody know how to become a member of Rancho Obi-Wan, how to check out the virtual museum, and to continue the conversation with you on social media if they want to say hello.
Well, you can go to ranchoobiwan.org, and it'll give you full details on how to become an annual member. And you get a wonderful kit with a beautiful new patch designed by Eric Ehrlich, very talented artist in the Midwest. And then click on the virtual museum and become a subscriber. And you can do that through our homemade version of Patreon, and go to one of the levels that suits you and gives you the video and photos and things like that. We've got in our database 60,000 photos, so we have a lot to put out there, and lots of video coming up, and we have a Rancho Obi-Wan Facebook page that almost daily we post new items. So lots to see and lots to do at Rancho Obi-Wan, even in these strange times.
Well, it certainly keeps the Star Wars fire stoked for me, and I'm very grateful for you and for Ann and for everybody and for bringing Star Wars home to us. Thank you so much, my friend, for being back on Coffee with Kenobi.
Thank you, Dan. It's been a delight.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
There's no one here.